Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for our virtual presentation of Nature at Noon. Today, we are excited to welcome Chase Krug to talk about seed saving and how to garden for seed saving. This is always a really interesting and fun topic. It's the kind of thing that seems like it's not that hard until you realize, like, oh, I should have planned ahead for this. And so now that it's December and we're all of us gardeners are dreaming about our gardens and planning for our gardens for next year, this is a good time to start thinking about how we might want to integrate seed saving into those plans. So Chase was a collections intern at Reiman Gardens in the summer of 2020. And I'm going to let him tell us a few more things about himself. So with that, Chase, why don't you go ahead and take over screen? Oh, and let me cover a couple other things. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, before we got officially started here, this presentation is being recorded today and will be posted on the Reiman Gardens YouTube channel and also shared on social media so that we can offer this to the broader Reiman Gardens audience. If you have questions, I do appreciate that everyone has their screens off. I would also appreciate it if anyone could have their sound off. And if you have questions, post them in the chat. And if we get to a point where, or posting in the chat is not a good option for you, we will have some time later on for discussion, and so we can sort of open up our screens and our sound at that point if we want. But this will be a good way to get started. So the chat's always a nice option, and then we can kind of keep the questions, keep track of questions as we go as well. So I think that covers the sort of housekeeping stuff I have to take. Chase, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and welcome to Nature at Noon at Reiman Gardens. I'll let you take over the screen sharing.
Thank you. I'm Chase Krug. I am a junior at Iowa State University studying philosophy and agronomy. And this past summer, I was the 2020 Plant Collections Intern, and I helped manage the plant collection at Reiman Gardens. This presentation is about seed saving, and it's going to give you the basics of seed saving and the basic tools throughout the presentation. To begin, we can start about the importance of seed saving. Preserving genetic crop diversity is important because it provides the foundations of how plant breeders and agriculturalists create and protect the food system from threats such as climate change, environmental degradation, preventing malnutrition through increasing nutritional content of the food, reducing poverty, and the development of sustainable agriculture. And crop genetic diversity can be visualized as, in this picture, we have a lot of bean varieties of different colors. They're going to have various structures that plant habit and flavor and a lot of different traits that we might not find in commercial scales, but might be important down the road for some unknown reason, such as disease resistance or pest resistance. Another reason, more of an intrinsic value of seed saving, is that it maintains culturally important cultivars for communities. This is an example of, this is one of my favorite bean varieties. It's called the Tolosa bean. It is valued for its flavor and culinary value. And what's interesting about this bean is that it's native to the Basque region of Spain. And in the Basque region, they actually celebrate a bean festival every year in November, celebrating the culture around the Basque community and the bean. So that's just a really interesting connection that this bean has, which is a really good analogy for other types of culturally important cultivars. Another reason is to improve crop cultivars. As stewards of seed saving, we are supposed to select cultivar or select plants in a cultivar that improves on what has been in the past. So it could be improved disease resistant in one type of plant out of your row that you're going to select seeds from, in the hopes of that trait continuing to be propagated throughout the line. So in this case, it could be improved disease resistance, insect resistance, and flavor. If there is a different flavor, some spontaneous mutation occurs, and the seed saver could take that and create another variety or continue it in the existing line. And another is just to maintain the knowledge of seed saving. As farmers and gardeners have moved away from saving their own seed, the knowledge has been being lost. And hopefully that if we continue to keep a living collection of seed saving, it helps maintain the intrinsic value of this practice. So one of the first steps of determining safe seeds is determining what type of plant you want to grow and determining what's its reproductive habit. So self-pollinating plants have both female and male reproductive organs, so they both have an anther and the stamen. And the plant self-fertilizes to produce seeds, so this could be a tomato, a bean, and before these flowers open, they actually self-pollinate, and then, so since they self-pollinate, their purity is very stable, so they're easy to save seed from. But if you have an outcrossing plant, so in this example, we have a male flower and a female flower. This is from a squash or some type of cucurbit, and these have both male flowers and female flowers on the same plant, but they're not together. So they have to have pollen must travel from a male flower to a female flower to fruit. So making sure that you know what type of plant this is that you're trying to save seed from is going to be important, determining other factors that we're going to discuss. Population size is another factor that's very important to maintain a large gene pool to prevent inbreeding depression. Inbreeding depression is just that you're breeding like individuals together, and what happens is that recessive traits could compile and be degrading the gene pool. So what happens is that your crops are not performing as well, and some traits are just not good in the line. So for example, for self-pollinating species, the Organic Seed Alliance recommends a minimum of 5 to 20 plants in order to maintain enough genetic diversity. So this is just a general overview. I personally maintain about 10 plants. I collect beans, so I enjoy growing bean varieties. So I generally have 10 individuals of beans that I grow out per variety, save the seed from, and make sure that I mix the seed together when I replant it next the following year. So maintaining population size is very important. For seed isolation, so this is the practice of preventing unwanted cross-pollination through foreign pollen. So in order to maintain this isolation, we have 3 different types of methods that can be used in conjunction with one another or separately. So the first one is distance. So this is planting. If you're planning to plant multiple cultivars of the same crop or the same species, and you want to prevent unwanted cross-pollination, you're going to try to distance them as far away from each other as possible in the hopes that the pollen will not transfer from one plant to another plant. And this sometimes works depending on if it's wind blown, where the plant disperses pollen into the wind. This is going to be requiring a lot more distance than what it is for an insect pollinated crop. So corn requires a lot more, since it's wind pollinated, requires a lot more distance compared to a tomato, which is self-pollinating. Another type of method is spacing out the flowering periods of the different cultivars. So let's say I have an early flowering maize variety or corn variety, and I have a later flowering corn variety. I could plant them let's say 2 weeks apart, and try to plant them 2 weeks apart, and then the pollination, when the flowering occurs and the pollen is dispersed, the reproductive organs are going to be at a maturity level that are different, so it's not going to they're not going to cross-pollinate essentially. And then the third variety, the third method is isolation. So this is when plants are planted near natural barriers or in man-made barriers to prevent cross-pollination. So this could be a cage that prevents insects from pollinating the plants, or it could be, let's say, a hill or some type of natural structure that prevents cross-pollination. And then some crops would recommend being hand pollination, which is the technique used to transfer pollen from the stamen to the stigma, which prevents contamination from foreign pollen. Using this method, multiple varieties of the same species can be grown together and can be grown at normal spacing, as long as you're making sure that you cover the flower bud before it opens, and then conducting pollinations as you would using hand pollination. Growing plants for seed saving. So in order to seed save, you have to grow the right plants. For most instances, you're going to be growing open pollinated seeds. An open pollinated crop cultivar is a cultivar that breeds true to type. So plants that breed true to type produce offspring that have similar characteristics as the parent. So if I plant a tomato seed of an open pollinated variety and I save seed from it, what will happen is that the next time I grow that seed, that you're going to have a similar plant compared to the parent. And then an heirloom variety is just an open pollinated variety which has some sort of historical significance or is an old cultivar of some type that is saved for a specific reason, either in a generation through a family, or it could be something like has historical cultural significance. And then a hybrid is a cross between two plant species or cultivars that when those seeds are saved from a hybrid, that their offspring will be very different from the parent plants. So you can save seed from hybrid plants, but it's not really recommended for beginning seed savers because you're not going to get the same plant from year to year. The next thing we have to do is determine the plant species you want to grow. Determining the plant species you want to grow is going to have to configure into the space requirements you have and the cultural requirements required to complete that plant's life cycle. So for instance, that if you want to grow a cucumber and save seeds from it, that cucumber, in order to have mature seeds, you have to harvest it later than what you would do to pick it for to eat. So you're gonna have to make sure that you leave enough fruits on the vine to ripen fully in order to save seed from them, essentially. And then you have to kind of talk and see if your space in the garden is very valuable. So you have to determine if that plant is worth it to have it reach maturity from sowing, if it's whether that's going to be viable seeds can be collected from that specific variety, or stuff like that. Some easy seed saving species would be the primary self-pollinating species, so species that don't require vernalization, which is just some type of cold period. Species that do require vernalization or have larger isolation distance requirements will take more planning and they'll take more care than self-pollinating annuals. So species such as lettuce, peas, and tomatoes and beans are ideal choices for anyone new to seed saving. We also have to determine a plant life cycle. Plant life cycle will determine when and how a seed can be saved. Annuals complete their life cycle in a year, in one growing season. The plants produce mature seeds and then they die. These are ideal because, as we will see later on, that the other crops that require multiple years to produce seed, they have some storage requirements that we'll talk about later. Summer annuals germinate during spring or early summer and mature by autumn of the same year. Some plants are grown midsummer, depending on what environmental conditions they prefer. This is when we get into the more advanced seed saving. So these are biennials, which complete their life cycle over 2 years. So these are most brassicas, so cabbage, for example. The first season, they only grow foliage. So that's going to be probably, in case of cabbage, it's going to be the head, and then you have the stem and the root. So once we have them from the first growing season, we'll plant them out again, and the second season, they'll form flowers and produce seeds. Then the mother plant dies, and then you'll be able to collect seed and then regrow them next year. Biennial root crops do need to be dug at the end of fall if you're in a cold climate that freezes, and they have to be replanted in the spring so they can produce seeds their second year. Storage requirements, if you have a root cellar, that's preferable. You just need a cold or cool, dark place to place the harvested root crops. When to save seeds. So mature seeds are determined by the maturity. It's dependent on the plant species. So if you take a carrot, which is biennial, you're gonna take seed from that when it's at the end of the season, it's the second year, and they have umbels that have ripe seed. You're gonna cut them at the appropriate time. Usually you're gonna look for dry faded flowers or those with puffy tops. Pods should be brown and dried. Ripe seeds tend to turn from white to cream colored or light brown to dark colored, depending on the plant, the species. And yeah. And then I just put this in here. This is just a discussion break. We'll take a couple minutes, just brainstorming, and I can answer some of these questions fast. I see in the chat. Let's see. Okay, it says, Chase, are you familiar with Rancho Gordo in Napa Valley? Yes, I am. So I did see the CBS Sunday show on Napa Valley beans. He is really cool, really great company. And I think, and yes, we will post the slides. Or Hector, yeah, I can send you the slides as well. If there are any other questions, I can answer them now, or we can continue on. Okay, seeing that there are no other questions, move on. Oh, there is one question. Okay, so seed collecting. Methods that are used to collect seed from different plants by individual plant species. Common methods of seed collecting include processing wet or dry seed material. I recommend referring to reference materials such as The Seed Garden or Seed to Seed. These books have an overall comprehensive view of specific crop species and how to save seed from them. Some common materials that are used to save seed include bags, paper plates, coffee filters, to collect dry seed material. And as we go in further, we'll discuss what wet processing entails. Wet processing is the process of taking crop cultivars such as crops such as tomatoes, watermelon, and similar seeds, and it removes excess wet pulp from the maternal fruit material from the seed. So in this case, we have a tomato which has been cut in half. The seeds are taken out of the plant or out of the fruit, placed into a jar, and they're allowed to ferment for a period of 2 to 3 days. And once they ferment, the gelatinous placental sac that contains germination inhibitors breaks down, and then the seed can be then rinsed and required and dried. This is pretty easy depending on what your time commitment is. However, wet processing generally entails a very smelly process. The fermentation from the fruit is very stinky, so I generally recommend doing it in some kind of garage or somewhere that you won't mind the smell. And it's generally recommended not to ferment more than 3 days, or the seed will begin to germinate because the germination inhibitors have been broken down. Dry processing is the removal of dry maternal tissue, such as chaff in the grain, and it's used in order to separate the chaff from the grain. The process is called winnowing, and winnowing is just gently blowing the non-seed material out of the container, and then the clean seeds are then dried to the appropriate moisture level. Species which require dry processing include corn, beans, grains, and brassicas. This is one of my pictures on the right here. This is from one of my amateur plant breeding projects, growing corn. So this is called Catito corn. And my goal was with this breeding project was to create a high vitamin A content corn. And through this process, I had to have take the grain off the cob, winnow it, and then store it appropriately for my plant breeding project. So I still have the seed to this day. It's been stored in my basement to be grown in the subsequent years. And usually corn seed lasts 3 to 5 years, depending on in storage that is non-refrigerated or non-frozen. For storage conditions, we generally recommend, for short-term seed storage, we generally recommend storage conditions that are cool, dark, and dry, that is climate controlled, so you don't want fluctuating temperatures such as in a garage. You have to have it in an airtight container to ensure no moisture gets in to cause premature germination. We're making sure that the seeds are dry before storing to prevent mold. And then seed crop viability is dependent on the crop species. For instance, onions only really last a year or two before they really reduce their germination, while as wheat or corn can really do 5 years stored at these conditions. But generally, we would say most seeds store up to 3 years as a general rule. Long-term seed storage. So long-term seed storage is for seed storage that you want to either grow a lot of varieties, and then you're going to have, at certain instances, you want to grow a certain cultivar every maybe decade or so. So long-term seed storage, you want to dry seeds before you place it into an airtight container. You're going to want to really dry the seed to the proper moisture level, so placing silica gel packs to get rid of excess moisture before freezing is ideal. You're going to freeze the seeds in airtight containers, making sure that your freezer stays at a pretty constant temperature throughout storage. Seeds can probably last a decade or more using this method. It's generally recommended to do a germination test from time to time, probably every 2 to 3 years. And then before you take out the seed for planting, you really want to let the seeds thaw before opening the container, preventing moisture coming in and ruining the other seed. So how to get started in seed saving. We talked about this at the beginning. We want to choose crop species that you're interested in growing and saving seeds from, taking into consideration time requirements from seedling to maturity, and then ensure that your space allows for the mature plant, because plants may grow larger than what they are at the edible or harvesting plant stage that you would eat the plant at. Seed selection. It's generally recommended to purchase seeds in early January or as soon as you receive the newest edition of a seed catalog. For instance, 2021 seed catalog should be coming out in the next month or two. You want to order early because the seed stock, for the best selection of cultivars, you want to order when the seed stock is full. I generally recommend ordering online because it ensures that the seed stock is in stock at the time of purchase. And then always make sure to purchase seed from reputable sources or seed companies to prevent disappointment. Do not buy seeds from eBay or Facebook Marketplace or stuff like that. It just really, you don't know what you're going to get when you buy from sources like those. So it's generally recommended to just do a reputable seed company or source. As we gain knowledge in seed saving, we can now begin to expand from just simple seed saving to more advanced projects. So an example is saving endangered crop cultivars. Stewarding an endangered crop cultivar from extinction is a very rewarding challenge, and it helps preserve crop genetic diversity. So I generally recommend, if you are wanting to save an endangered crop cultivar, make sure that you know what you're doing and that you know what responsibilities that it entails. So, and making sure that that risk is spread out throughout the garden, making sure that when you do collect seed, that you save some for yourself, but also distribute to others to make sure that in case you have a crop failure one year, that you're able to obtain seed again, and making sure the lineage continues. One of my favorite things is amateur plant breeding. So through this is the creation of your own unique cultivar, which could create an improved, unique, or better adapted plant to your local area. There's a ton of literature on amateur plant breeding. And if you have questions at the end, we can definitely discuss like why you should try plant breeding. Some of the national organizations that I either are a part of or were a part of at one point is Seed Savers Exchange. So Seed Savers Exchange is based in Decorah, Iowa. They are a seed saving organization, and every year if you're a member, they publish a seed yearbook. It's called the Seed Savers Exchange Yearbook, and it's almost like 200 plus page catalog of seeds that people from around the nation and the world are selling and are exchanging. So this is a great place to become a member, get the yearbook, and then start looking up different cultivars in the book and requesting cultivars from around the world that you are interested in. Another unique organization is the Kenosha Potato Project. The group works to preserve and breed cultivars of potatoes. Members usually exchange information, plant material. They have an event every year called the Seed Train. And what happens is that they collect seed from the 200 plus members of the group. It goes into a package, and the package goes from address to address throughout the United States, where people pick seed, put seed more in, and just exchange seed. So it's a really unique event there. The Little Easy Bee Network is the network that I'm mostly a part of. The group works to preserve rare bean cultivars. How this works is members select rare beans to grow out. The seed samples are sent for you for free. Shipping's paid for already. and at the end of the season, you've grown the plants and you've saved seed from them, and 60 seeds are sent back to the organization, and you keep any extra seeds. So this is a great way to get a large amount of cultivars very fast, and then 60 seeds is generally easy to come up with as long as you have a good year. So those are organizations that I recommend. Some seed saving literature. The best one I have seen is the Seed Garden. This is in collaboration with the Organic Seed Alliance and Seed Savers Exchange. Great book, a lot of pictures. It is a sequel to Seed, essentially. It just has a lot more pictures, more in depth. Seed to Seed is good as well, but the Seed Garden is definitely by far my favorite. Some amateur plant breeding literature is Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties by Carol Deppy, or Plant Breeding for the Home Gardener. Both great books. The Carol Deppy book is definitely more in depth, but I generally recommend looking these books up. Some recommended seed companies that I either heard about or generally have a great experience in would be Seed Saver Exchange and Sand Hill Preservation Center. Both are based in Iowa, so definitely great to support local seed companies. Baker Creek, Sustainable Seed Company, Victory Seed, Southern Seed Exposure, Native Seed Search, Experimental Farm Network, and Cultivariable. Great seed companies. I definitely recommend you check them out. And then, are there any questions? Let me pull it up.
Chase, one question that came up was from Nancy. She was wondering if you had any good resources for cultivating flower seeds in particular.
I could get back to you. I did read a book once that had some flower seed. It really depends on what type of species it is. Generally, you can probably look at, like, for example, a sunflower. Some books do have sunflowers, so you could look at, okay, so it's in the Asteraceae family, so it's probably going to be similar. So I could use instructions from the sunflower page, and you can kind of look back and forth and say, oh, they have similar structures and stuff like that. But I could definitely look up what type of book I was referencing. So yeah, I can get back to you.
Nancy, if you wanted to share contact information, you could message it to me privately, or message it to Chase privately, and he could follow up with you that way. Why don't we go ahead and, Chase, why don't you end your screen sharing if you're ready, if your presentation is sort of wrapped up, and if you can, everybody could go to a gallery view. If you have questions and you feel like you would like to, we could go ahead and turn on our cameras and our audio, and we could start to just have a conversation if we're at that point. Chase, I don't want to take over your whole presentation.
Yeah, I'm ready for questions. Yeah.
Great. We have one from Jesse Liebenguth here at the garden. Says, do most amateur plant breeders do this just as a hobby? Is there any sort of pipeline? If you found something insanely new and important, could you get that to a plant breeder or a breeding company?
Yes, some of the most greatest innovations have actually come from plant breeders, amateur plant breeders. Luther Burbank created the russet potato. So those are all potatoes that are in all stores. So he was an amateur breeder, and he created the russet potato. There is definitely, so usually what happens is that an amateur breeder, they somehow find something really interesting. And if you did find something really interesting, what would happen is that you would take it to a seed company, see if they're interested, and ask for a royalty or plant protection, plant patent of some sort. Another thing would be just have rights on its propagation. It really is legal. Legally, there's some hurdles, but some organizations such as I think it's the Organic Seed Alliance, actually has pretty easy legal wrangling. And what they do is that they sign a petition that this seed variety, that anything that's propagated is, it's like an open source. So like the open source seed initiative, it's called. And plant breeders go in and register their plant cultivar. And then from that register promises that you are not allowed to patent or solely own the rights of this cultivar. So it can be used in plant breeding easily. It could be used to in seed stores or like plant nursery sales, that this variety is free and open to the public. Let's see, what was the other part of that question? Is it just a hobby?
Yeah, is it just a hobby, or would there be a way to, I think would there be a way to get, if you made a discovery as an amateur breeder, would there be a way to get that to, to scale that up or get it to, to sort of get it in the commercial pipeline?
Most amateur breeders generally stay amateur, but some have created it into a business. So one of those examples was Cultivariable. So that was a guy in Washington, I think he's on the West Coast, and he started breeding just amateur plant breeding, and that has evolved into his own seed company. So there's definitely a progression, but a lot of them just stay amateur plant breeders and just have royalties of some sort, or have open source that anybody can use it just for the benefit of the public. So yeah.
Okay, Chase, we have a couple more questions. One of them, I'll go ahead and start using these. And if anybody who's participating can share anything in this, feel free to add to the comments as well, or chime in with audio. But the question is, has anyone tried using a food saver device, capital F, like that's naming a specific product, I think, a food saver device to vacuum pack seeds to remove all the water for long-term seed saving? We have I have a vacuum sealer at home, but I haven't used it for seed saving purposes. But that's an interesting question.
I've heard about that method. I'm concerned that that when that happens, unless it's from like a Mylar, the specialized Mylar bags that are used for long-term seed storage, I'm not sure if a food saver device would allow for oxygen exchange, or in making, especially when you vacuum seal, it's going to crush the seed. So I don't know if that will do damage to the seed. It all depends on what materials you use. So I think definitely look into that if you're interested.
Another question is from Hector. He says, my potatoes randomly produce fruits, but I don't know what to do with them. They just fall off while they're fall to the ground while green. Will new potatoes sprout from them?
Okay, so potatoes do produce fruit. It's called botanical fruit. Do not eat them. They're highly poisonous.
Okay.
So do not eat them. But I have bred potatoes for the last 3 years or so. And generally what I do to save seed from potatoes to grow my own new cultivars is generally that before they drop, I usually put a bag on them to make sure that they drop in some sort of bag and I don't have to search around the garden for a potato fruit. But once that happens, I then take it and I use the wet processing method. So I'll grind it in a blender, and then I'll let it, I generally don't ferment them, but some people do. So you grind it in a blender, put it in the water, rinse it, and then you'll just have pure seed. Allow the pure seed to dry, store it appropriately. And then there are great sites of how to sprout true potato seed. It's called TPS, because botanical, that's a botanical seed. And then we call seed potatoes are just like small tubers. So that's how you grow potatoes from seed. When you do that, there are going to be a large variety of stuff that will happen from that. Like you're going to have different colors, different shapes. So definitely, I definitely recommend it. It's really fun.
That's great. I actually had no idea about that. So that would be a fun thing to try sometime. All right, more questions rolling in here. What is your favorite result from your breeding work? Either an actual good plant or fruit or seed, or a lesson that you might have not learned otherwise?
Yeah, so 2 of my breeding projects that had at least some success. my potato breeding project, I received 2 grants for that project.
Oh, wow.
It was like I gained $2,000 to breed potatoes from the FFA organization for my project. That breeding work resulted in, like, I was really interested in dark colored potatoes. So I had a pure black potato, like the
Wow.
outside was black and the inside was total black, and it yielded well here. So that was really fun. That was a really good line that I really enjoyed. I lost it, but I do have seed from its offspring. And then my other project was the corn project. That project was really fun in that it really grew well here in Iowa. Surprising because it's corn. But usually open pollinated corn varieties are very susceptible to disease. And since we have tons of cornfields everywhere and disease spreads pretty easily, having a cultivar that's open pollinated that does well here is really fun. And that one was pure orange, so just the vibrant colors was fun to play with. So yeah, that's kind of my favorite things about breeding.
Those are 2 pretty impressive stories. That sounds exciting. All right, here's another question. How are hybrid tomato seeds raised? Are they really cross-pollinated from 2 different varieties? And how do you cross-pollinate a tomato flower with 2 different varieties?
Okay, so if you're gonna grow hybrid tomato seeds, tomato cultivars to save seed from, that project is going to be you're wanting to create your own cultivar at some point. You wouldn't really want to grow hybrids unless if you want to do breeding. But you're just going to normally you just plant the hybrid tomatoes as normal propagation. They're raised normally, and then if you want self-pollination, what you'll do is just take a small cheesecloth bag or something similar, just to prevent bees from going to the flower, putting it over the flower, and then allowing the fruit to develop. And then you're going to make sure to mark the fruit to make sure that you know what it is and that you put this time in, and you want to make sure that you get the seed that you want. Tomatoes do cross-pollinate each other, but it's very unlikely. It's just usually tomatoes have a fused cone on their flower that prevents bees from pollinating it. So what usually happens is that a bumblebee will come along, and it's the only species that's large enough to pollinate flowers such as tomatoes, and it will grab the cone and then it will violently shake its wings. That releases pollen from the flower onto the bee, and then it will go to another flower and do the same thing. So only bumblebees do breed tomatoes because of their flower anatomy, but generally you'll have maybe a couple fruits from a tomato variety cross-pollinated, but it's not substantial enough to put investment in like covering everything. So yeah. And then how do you cross-pollinate a tomato flower with 2 different varieties? Okay, so in order to cross-pollinate 2 tomato flowers, what you do is, it's called emasculation. Emasculation is just you're either removing the female or the male parts of the flower before maturity of the flower. So if you type in tomato flower emasculation, you'll find a video of it. But essentially what happens is that the person will come in to an unopened flower and take a tweezers and remove either if you want it to be the male parent or the female parent. So if it's the male parent, you're going to remove everything except the anthers. And then you're going to keep that pollen. And then you're going to go to the female flower and remove the petals, the sepals, all male parts of the flower. And then you're going to cover it with some cheesecloth for a couple days until the flower is receptive. And then the stamen will be receptive, and you're going to pollinate the stamen with your male flower. So that's the process of hybridization between 2 tomato cultivars in particular. There's a really great video out there on YouTube on how to do that.
That sounds involved. I mean, not like super involved, but having some familiarity with like flower anatomy and knowing exactly what you're looking at and that kind of thing would be helpful. Are there some good resources that you like for like basic sort of flower parts, pollination for beginners, that kind of thing?
Usually I've learned it in plant biology classes, so like your general biology classes, but I do think I have seed to seed here. I believe this does talk about the flower and they give great, yes, they do. So where is it in here? I just lost it. But in this book, there is a diagram of plant anatomy of the flower. So really great resource in this book.
Good to know. That's nice when those sort of advanced information resources also have some of the basics in there, so you can get that to start with. I have some more comments here. Jesse was looking at. I was also very. My ears perked up when you said that bumblebees violently shake their wings, and Jesse actually Googled it, and she said she learned that when bumblebees pollinate tomatoes, it's called buzz pollination.
Yep.
And they pollinate their wings, or they vibrate their wings at 400 hertz. Is that, I actually don't know what metric that is, or like what unit that is. 400 Hz, that's what it says. There's a video that she's looking at. Another question, is there a special type of plastic bag that you used for preserving seeds?
It depends on what the seed is. For beans, they're generally pretty dry, so I generally have put them in a plastic bag, just a normal sandwich bag with no problem. As long as I kept them in an airtight container. I've also placed them in like, they're like these bags, these little seeds. So I placed them in these and they've done fine. I've actually germinated them and they're like 5 years old and they still have almost 100% germination. So these type of envelopes work fine as long as you're placing them in another container that's airtight and has very little moisture.
Very good. Jesse has shared the link with the bee pollinating the flower, and I was just watching it. That's why I was making funny voices, because it does sound like, hearing that bee buzzing sound makes my lizard brain react in a way that's like, ooh, buzzing. All right. Well, this is great. What fun resources.
Yes.
Very cool. Well, what does anybody else have other questions or comments or anything else? All right, Chase, this has been super interesting, and I'm very happy to have you back, part of what's going on here at Reiman Gardens. So thank you very much. Yay. All right. Well, I just want to end thank yous from several of our Lindsay and Hector and Jackie and Rick and Marge and Norm are all saying thanks. Everybody really appreciates your time and your expertise on this. It sounds like you've done some really exciting work in this area. I do want to let everybody know that right now at Reiman Gardens, if you haven't been here lately, we have a lot of fun stuff going on. Winter Wonderscape, our big holiday light show, has launched. Last weekend was our first weekend, and we have heard some rave reviews so far. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights in December and into the first weekend in January, the Gardens is open for our holiday lights display. It's all outdoors. It's COVID safe. Masks are required, and we encourage distancing. If you are especially interested in having some extra distancing, Thursday night is the night to go. We have more limited attendance on those nights, and we're very strongly encouraging everybody to buy your tickets online ahead of time. In most cases, we expect the light show to sell out each night. I have a question from Rick about whether the light fountain has arrived. There is one additional piece that was under a delayed shipping situation. I do not have any information about that. Jesse, I don't know if you know, or Sarah, if you know any information about the light fountain, but there are some more, or Lindsay, there are some more exciting pieces that are going to be, that we're going to be adding in as we go through the light show. But we really would love to see everybody come out and take part. It's a fun and safe way to really add some cheer to your holiday season. And of course, we're offering more and more online things through the gardens. We've had some online programs and things lately that have been successful. So keep following us on social media, checking in on the website, and paying attention to what we have going on here at the gardens. Chase, thank you so much for your presentation today. This was really, really interesting and a lot of fun. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. All right, signing off.